It was a crisp fall day when I walked through the big red doors of my church, ready to give my presentation to be confirmed. In the beginning of that year, I had been prompted to do a project that would benefit the church for my confirmation. I had heard about the dangers of climate change before, but I wasn't very well versed in the issue. However, I knew I wanted to do what I could to protect the earth, a big part of Christian faith. I thought if any project would benefit the church, it would be an informational presentation about climate change and how our church can increase sustainability. However, as I finished my presentation in the dark church room, the faces of the crowd did not reflect excitement of the church being bettered. They were a closer resemblance to eating a lemon. Going into the project, I was simply excited that I had learned about this terrible thing called climate change, and that I had ways the church could change for the better. However, I soon realized that there was more than just the facts within the issue of climate change. There is another side to the issue, the side that has been politicized, the side of people who actually deny its existence. When Miss Dunley brought up choosing a class to take at the beginning of my ELS class this year, I began scrolling through the options on edX.com. The expressions of my fellow church members watching my presentation bounced into my head as I saw a class labeled Making Sense of Climate Science Denial. I immediately signed up, and as I worked through the numerous lectures and modules, I found myself drawn to one specific idea. This idea is that climate change denial and science denial in general are fueled by one thing, and that thing is self-interest. And it is necessary to address climate change denial to solve the climate crisis. The first thing I would like to talk about is just some general background information about climate change. The most abundant greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide. Many processes release carbon dioxide in our world, some of the most prevalent being the burning of fossil fuels in animal agriculture. Carbon dioxide is a heat-trapping gas, and therefore heat is trapped in the atmosphere and oceans as carbon is released. This is referred to as the greenhouse effect. The more CO2 emitted, the more heat being trapped, increasing the greenhouse effect and making the world warmer. Greenhouse gases occur naturally and are essential to organisms, but the current warming trend is human-caused. Human fingerprints, or evidence of human-caused global warming, is seen in many ways. Many people do not believe in climate change or in its severity. The most common argument against climate change is that the warming of the earth is a result of natural causes. However, this argument, among other arguments against climate change, is a myth. There are numerous reasons why each argument against climate change is invalid, but in proving that climate change isn't caused by natural causes, the proof lies in human fingerprints. Scientists can be so confident that climate change is human-caused because of the numerous human fingerprints seen in the natural environment. Evidence of climate change can be seen in an increased average global temperature, warming ocean temperatures, ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland are shrinking, glaciers are retreating, there's decreased snow cover and earlier melting of snow, global sea level is rising, and the acidity of surface ocean waters is increasing. The reason climate change is a pressing issue is because of the effects it will have on the planet if action is not taken. Some effects include global temperatures will continue to rise, there will be increased heavy precipitation, an increased amount of droughts and heat waves, a rise in the intensity and strength of hurricanes, sea levels will continue to rise, and the Arctic Ocean will likely become ice-free. According to the United Nations, the world only has until 2030 to cut carbon dioxide emissions down to roughly half those of 2010 levels. If this is not accomplished by 2030, climate change will be irreversible. Research from climate scientist Naomi Oreskes found that 97.2% of climate scientists agree that humans are causing global warming. Now that I have discussed the facts behind climate change, I'm going to move into the politicization of climate change. Climate change is a fact agreed upon by scientists. Unlike other issues involved in politics, there should not be the same amount of weight given to the side of climate change claiming conspiracies or invalid science to be the truth. However, this very thing has happened in our world. Because of the repercussions of climate change action on the economy, personal belief, and personal routine, climate change has become politicized. As a result of politicization, climate change action has received enormous pushback from a large portion of the country and world. The political party generally against climate change in the United States is the Republican Party. So, in talking about the denial of climate change, the overarching reason for denial is self-interest. And within self-interest, there are three main categories. The first is worldview, the second is economic gain, and the third is lifestyle or personal benefit. So, in talking about the first reason, which is worldview, this can be a person's political standing, their religion, their loyalty to a group, etc. So it's how they see the world, their beliefs. And the most important worldview in climate change is politics, because a person's political standing is very important in the issue of climate change because it has been politicized. For example, if someone believes in a certain political party and they hear from the leader of that political party or someone that they follow that climate change is not real, it's caused by natural causes, that is what they're going to believe because they want to be in accordance with their group or their party. It's the same in religion, it's the same in other groups. Worldview is really people wanting to be in accordance with what they believe. So the second category in the reasons for the denial of climate change is economic gain. Climate change action will require government spending and will raise taxes. And obviously, a large portion of the country wants to keep government spending and taxes as low as possible. They are not going to want to increase them in any way, even if that means taking action to save the earth. People deny climate change in order to protect themselves from having to pay any more than they have to, or to spend any more money than they have to. And then going along with that, there's also the fossil fuel companies. People who are invested in them, people who believe in them, will also deny climate change for the same economic reasons. Climate change action will cause fossil fuel companies to make less money or even go bankrupt. So people who have those economic interests in mind will use denial of climate change as a means to protect those businesses. And then the third thing is lifestyle being able to stay the same or a personal benefit. Accepting climate change as the truth would require people to think about changing their wasteful habits or decreasing their carbon footprint. Many wasteful practices are convenient and easy, and people want to avoid having to change their routine, which causes people to deny climate change. So, according to the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg Public Policy Center, only about half to two-thirds of Americans believe that climate change is real and that it is caused by humans. Although climate change deniers likely fall in the minority within beliefs on climate change in America, multiple studies have shown that the typical American believes the amount of climate change deniers to be far greater than in actuality. This is because of a phenomenon called vocal minority. Although the group of people who deny climate change is relatively small, they seem much bigger because they are so vocal. This is important because this group is able to have a disproportionate influence on the rest of the public. They are able to manufacture doubt in others about climate change and other subjects. So now that you know the reasons behind denial and the reason why it's so prevalent in our society, how do you identify it? There is an acronym called FLICC, spelled F-L-I-C-C, that depicts the strategies climate change deniers and others use when denying climate change or other science. The first letter stands for fake experts. People will use scientists' beliefs against climate change who are not climate scientists, for example, to back up their claim of it not being true. The next letter stands for logical fallacies, which are logically false arguments irrelevant to the problem. The next strategy is impossible expectations, which is where the person will argue that for the claim to be true, there must be X amount of evidence. The evidence the person requires to believe the science is impossible. The next letter stands for cherry picking, in which the person will take a specific fact or piece of data out of context and ignore any other data conflicting to reach their desired conclusion. Finally, the last letter stands for conspiracy theories, which is where the person will claim the scientists, organizations, etc. are conspiring to falsify or exaggerate the science in climate change's case. So, in knowing these different strategies that people who deny climate change and other scientists use, it will be easier to identify when people are denying, and that will come in handy when trying to debunk a myth, which I will talk about later. Now that I have demonstrated science denial within climate change, it is valuable to recognize another current example. The same patterns in climate change denial can be seen within the current coronavirus pandemic. There is overwhelming evidence to COVID-19 being truthful and to its severity. The evidence comes from the fact that over 360,000 Americans have died since the start of this pandemic. Doctors and medical professionals agree on the severity of the virus and the need for the public to take it seriously. However, people still deny the existence of the coronavirus and its severity. And when you break it down, the same 3 reasons causing denial of climate change are seen in the coronavirus. In worldview, political standing plays into denial of the virus because a person tends to want to be in accordance with their political party. The Republican Party is generally the party who has the greater percentage of COVID-19 deniers. In economic gain, isolation causes restaurants, businesses, and entertainment to shut down. People may deny the virus in looking out for their personal economic gain or for the country's economy as a whole. And for lifestyle, being safe and in accordance with guidelines around the coronavirus is hard. It has threatened the social and regular aspects of all lives in the United States. It is much easier to continue on with normal life than to restrain yourself amidst a pandemic. This is the reason many people deny COVID-19 or its severity. People look out for themselves instead of the greater good. The denial or downplaying of the virus is seen by doctors and professionals as a coping mechanism. The idea of denial as a coping mechanism is also true for climate change. People deny climate change in order to avoid the consequences of accepting its truth. This denial stems from self-interest as well. Like climate change, denial of the science behind the coronavirus is a big issue because there's something bigger at risk. For the coronavirus, it is the lives of the people infected. Thousands of Americans have died this year from the virus. And for climate change, it is the well-being of the Earth and its inhabitants. It is scary to think that a virus causing hundreds of people to die each day could be denied because climate change does not have such pressing evidence. This example of science denial in the coronavirus pandemic proves the relevance of denial in our current world, therefore proving the precedence of combating climate denial. So now that you know the causes of science denial, the prevalence of it in our world, and the need to combat it, how should you go about fighting science denial? As follows are the steps to an effective conversation about science denial. First, you should lead with talking points tied to the person's values. According to climate scientist Katherine Hayhoe, the best way to have a conversation about climate change is to lead with talking points tied to the person's values. This could be emphasizing the well-being of our community, for example, or keeping in mind the next generation. By leading with shared values, you are able to neutralize the partisan charge on climate change. Next, you need to follow up with a fact. It is important to follow up your talk of shared values with evidence. Although leading with facts can cause the person to shut down, inserting facts afterward is necessary. The book Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath explains that when dealing with complex or sticky myths, it's important to use an even stickier fact. The book uses the acronym SUCCESS to explain criteria for a sticky fact. The fact should be simple, unexpected, credible, concrete, use emotional messages, and could tell a story. Even when using sticky science, according to inoculation theory, teaching the science isn't enough. You next need to expose people to the myths in order to build resistance to misconceptions. You will need to warn the person you are going to state the myth, then specify the myth the person believes. Finally, you will explain how the myth distorts the science. You could enhance your argument by identifying the type of fallacy the myth uses within FLIC. So, the steps to an effective debunking of a myth are as follows. First, lead with a connection to the person's values. Second, state the sticky facts. Third, provide warning and state the myth they believe. And fourth, explain how the myth distorts the science. Climate change is sadly not just facts. There is another layer to the issue of politicization, misrepresentation of the facts, and denial. There is no way for climate change to be resolved without addressing both parts. Therefore, we must learn how to debunk myths and have conversations about climate change. In order to have conversations about climate change and increase the consensus in our world of climate change action being necessary, it is important for a person to understand the reason behind science denial. Through the causes of science denial explored, including worldview, economic gain, and personal benefit, it can be concluded that science denial is fueled by self-interest. The presence of science denial within the coronavirus pandemic proves the relevance of science denial within our world today and the need to address climate denial in order to solve climate change. Sometimes I think back to when I gave my presentation about climate change at my church. It was the first time I had ever spoken to a group about this issue. I wish I could go back to that day ready to have conversations about climate change. I wish I had the knowledge of denial I now do so that I could understand how to combat what felt like 100 questions being thrown at me afterward. I know now that it is so important to combat climate change denial. It is the only way to save our planet. I am presenting today as a way to educate you on climate change and science denial. I hope you will leave this presentation ready to recognize science denial and have effective conversations. The only way to solve climate change and other similar issues is to face the sour lemon faces of deniers. To have conversations. This is the only way to ensure a long-lasting and sustained planet. Thank you.